Thank you for being here with us tonight or this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are calling in from. We are delighted to see you all with great interest. This is the 8th Hot Topics in Dark Time that we have the pleasure of bringing to you from the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology and the Traumatic Stress Network. My name is Eric Vermetten, and together with Irina Frankova and Joseph Zohar, we are hosting the Traumatic Stress Network, and we are delivering every 2 weeks a webinar. So I'd like to give the floor to Irina Frankova, who will start this session.
And it's my pleasure to present our first speaker, Professor Stevan Hobfoll from United States. And Stevan Hobfoll is a leading authority on stress and resiliency. And I will not tell you how many papers he have published, a lot. But the most important thing is he is an expert, and he has developed 5 essential principles. And this model actually we currently using as a main approach at the early stage after the war has started in Ukraine.
So let's get started, and the floor is yours, Stevan.
Yeah, let me get my slides up just so it's ready. So everyone, welcome. It's a privilege to be here with you today. I'm sure over what's occurred over the last few months, you have more to teach me than I have to teach you, but I'll try to share what I have, which is also, based on long-term experience. And I lived in Israel for years and worked in Israel for more years than that, and worked on many mass casualty situations. So I hope that my expertise will be of value. I also want to say from the outset, you have my contact information. Please invite me if you have groups that want to do further training or meetings. I'm glad to give presentations. Of course, there's no charge for any of this. This is my trying to do my part. So if at your university or clinic, and don't think, oh, we're just too small a group, or we're an insignificant group because we're just one clinic elsewhere. There's no such thing as not important enough. You're all doing really important work, and if I could contribute in any way, I'm really happy to do so. So we're going to present about the 5 elements of immediate and midterm mass trauma intervention. And I'll try to be on time. It's actually the work of many people. Eric Shalev was one of the key people actually in formulating this, along with my colleague Patricia Watson, and then this whole significant group of world-renowned experts. I will say anything intelligent I say today, you can attribute to members of the group, but I take full responsibility for any mistakes and poor judgment. I assure you they're mine. Well, the history of trauma is this history, is the history of the world. As you see, as this painting of the plague from ancient Greece. And for me, it's emblematic in this Goya painting, which is so modern, even though it's from hundreds of years ago, because we see the, well before robots, look how robotic the soldiers are. They are just on automatic pilot, following orders, and they're almost not living creatures. The living creatures are the victims on the other side. Of course, the incredible thing about Ukraine now is it is not being a victim, but showing valiance and resilience in so many ways that is just amazing the world. we really didn't have a very good framework for mass casualty until the attack of September 11th on the World Trade Center. It really was queued up the world mental health establishment of how lacking we were. There was, of course, things developed in Israel, especially because of their history, but really lacking in terms of any frameworks for the world. And that's been changing a lot. Now, the 5 essential elements that intervention needs to promote, and it's important that these 5 are the guideposts. And another way to look at it is if you're deviating from this, you're probably off course, because there's so much to do within these 5 that becomes primary. They include promoting safety, promoting calming, promoting a sense of self and communal efficacy, promoting connectedness, promoting hope. And all this is achieved through individual, group, family, organizational, media, political outreach, and consultation. And in other words, one could also say that the level of individual intervention is probably the least important, because there's no way to get to the numbers that are produced by such catastrophic events. So we really have to move to group, family, organizational, and using others as the providers, where the mental health professionals really become trained the people who will deliver, teachers, social workers, daycare workers, workers that work with the elderly, all kinds of others become, in many ways, the primary agents of intervention. Now, usually our mass casualty intervention is very ad hoc, and even clinical work is usually ad hoc. You kind of do what you feel at the moment, but the overall strategy that you present really should consider and follow this overall 5 principles. Planning should follow the organic nature of the event, of course. Each event has a signature, and in fact, different times during the event has a signature. What was true for intervention in the first week prior to the war, when there was a threat, is completely different from what is the best strategy in the first week, and although has overlap, is very different from what needs to occur now. Timing and sequencing are critical, and they can also place intervention out of balance. We have a tendency to over-respond to front-loaded demands, and then we become overwhelmed in those. You really have to do a resource assessment and consider what's going to be coming next and next after that, and already be planning for all those stages. And that's hard to do because we tend to draw our focus to the immediacy of the here and now. Strategizing also implies that there's a directing group. So what's also different than the typical clinical work is, and sometimes the same group has to become the planning group and strategizing, what do we do next? What about next week? What about this event that's likely to occur? You know, normally clinicians don't do that. We just kind of, you know, we might have a clinical meeting where we discuss a case, but that's very different than strategizing about our overall approach. Maybe we need to abandon all individual clinic work, for example, at some point, and entirely be working with teachers and other caretakers and teaching them to present and do the actual in-person work. Maybe half of us need to be doing that and the other half doing the individual clinical work. Said another way, if you're doing individual clinical work, you're only going to be producing the smallest percent of those in need. Staging is also very important. So we need to think about where we are in the development, what's expected, and to be ready for at each time the next stage of what might be occurring. You know, one example is, are there already people coming back now to Ukraine who feel a need to come back and be participating and helping? They're in a completely different place than those who've been there the whole time. It introduces a different group. Our families attempting to reunite. All these are different things that occur as the signature of the event is changing. Now, another important point, psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists, we're all appraisal and perception based. And at least it is my standpoint that that is, I'll exaggerate slightly, nonsense. Humans are objective observers. Now, of course, there's variation within that, but these are real things going on. So for example, safety is a physical state, and you cannot convince me that I'm safe if I'm actually unsafe. So don't try. You at best might be able to convince me of relative safety. This also means that mental health workers need to support, for example, emergency troops or emergency groups or military to help promote safety by, for example, getting people to leave their homes and move to a shelter if that's the thing that's safer to do. Staying in their home if that is the thing to do. These are psychological processes where communication and through media, for example, becomes critical. Traumas create the illusion of ongoing harm. However, what that means is, in addition to the real harm, the trauma creates an illusion of further harm that's even more overwhelming. So at the moment, I might be relatively safe. For example, if military operations have moved elsewhere, but I believe that my death or my family's death is imminent, is inevitable. So that would be an example of, it's reality-based, but it's catastrophizing of reality. And that's a space that's quite different, because clinicians usually work entirely on people making stuff up. The depressed person who has no reason to be depressed. These individuals have every reason to be anxious and depressed and worried. Psychological messaging becomes critical. So the extent that you can avail yourselves as mental health professionals to local media, newspapers, political spokespeople, that has enormous potential of getting to people. And it may well be out of your comfort zone. You're likely never had to have been trained in that. But I assure you, you have a lot of ideas that are important that, for example, those who are in charge of the media and might be, for example, in charge of this shelter here, have no idea of what to do psychologically. They knew to get the people here, they knew to set up the cots, and that's the end of their thinking. You have information about how you might take this and in the morning be running 12 or 15 groups here within this, different age groups, a group of mothers who are caring for young children, and to be working with that group about how better to care for their children. The people organizing this who have created the miracle of this shelter have no idea how to do that. You have the expertise to do that. Those that have elderly at home, that could be another group. And so I'm meeting with that in between what's called the sandwich generation and helping them think about what you could be doing for elderly family members who are too ill to make the escape out of Ukraine and have to be staying. because again, those people have no idea how to support their elderly. They may have some ideas. You have the expertise, but now you have to change from clinician to professor, to instructor, to clinical supervisor. And you may have never done clinical supervision in your life. And even if you're a clinical supervisor, you may have never worked with a group of adults who are having to care for their elderly. And in this room, there might be 50 of them. So you have to get out of your comfort zone. How people cope initially is critical for the future. Each stage is the mother of the level of anxiety of the next stage. If I can do somewhat well right now, that foments future success. The worse I do right now, the more I'm swirling down the drain. And that means that the mental health services will have that much harder work to do. How authorities communicate and aid safety or interfere with it is critical, to the extent that those who can get these connections and have these connections, and Ukraine is a country of connections where, you know, people know each other through family and friends and growing up together, and people tend to stay more or less near where they were born. There's a lot of connections there. And so the extent that you can get the ear of those who are doing public safety can really matter in messaging. Classic errors of the past also are the assumption that those who are very low in resources can respond just because you talk to them through talk therapy. And that's nonsensical. Many people don't have the resources to engage therapy, which means that you have to implant those resources. That might be another family member, for example. And so you're teaching that family member not only for their own coping, that may be the family member doing best. And they've got to be the one to be giving support to other family members who are not capable of engaging in the therapeutic process. I want to get through, that was enough on safety, there's a lot here. Calming. Mental health professionals have an armamentarium of techniques to limit anxiety. And really, it's time to think outside the box. So for example, the most important thing you might do, let's go back to that idea of that shelter. The most important thing you might be able to do one evening is an evening of Ukrainian folk dancers. Someone there somehow has brought a guitar or an accordion. If not, people always can sing. And dancing to the glory of Ukraine can be the most important thing for calming that you might be able to do. In the West, we're into yoga and exercise, but to some extent, you know, a good exercise session can be critical for any group. And maybe some of the ideas of yoga, even if you don't have a yoga studio, maybe you have a woman there in the group or a guy who they don't really nothing about mental health training, but they ran a yoga studio. Employ them, get them working, get them doing. And that'll also be important for something else we're going to talk about in a bit. Mental health professionals are really best at dealing with the deep emotional traumas, get other people to be working maybe with more moderate and light level trauma, again, through this train the trainer idea. I'm going to say this another way. If you're a clinician and you're spending all your time doing clinical work, you're probably doing the wrong thing. Now, perhaps if you had a group of 30 and you had some people who were the dedicated clinicians, perhaps. But if that group did not have other people who are doing this more broad level intervention, there is no possible way. New York has the highest level of psychotherapists per capita in the world. And we estimate that there were 500 people with PTSD per clinician after 9/11. So even with the most highly psychotherapized place in the world with the most expertise, one clinician cannot be addressing 500 people. And said another way, if those clinicians were working individually, they were only probably getting to 5%, if less, of the people who needed them. So this idea of calming, again, back to that group, let's say there's a shelter for children, or working with people in their homes that have children in the homes. Having someone who's a teacher that does artwork and turning that into art therapy, children expressing themselves through art, talking to parents about letting the children talk about what they're drawing, can have enormous clinical potential. Okay, not as good as play therapy from a trained play therapist, but that's not an option now. So this idea of spreading the wealth and creating webs of intervention, in this case to produce calming, is critical. I would also say for the calming is one cannot try to convince people that everything's okay. You can't take catastrophizing and say there is no catastrophe. You can only say that at the level there's relative safety here. There is reason for some hope forward. And hope is a moving dial because it is not the same hope we had 6 months before this happened. That is not the reality. And clinicians have to be very careful about not trying to fool the public, if you will. A lot of this, again, has to work through communication, internet, large institutional settings, and we even have the problem that they may not have movement. If a place is unsafe, hopefully there's an internet connection and treatment can go on. And I'm sure you're doing much of this. I'm going to go quickly here so I can get to all the different points. You're welcome to go through these slides on your own. The sense of self and communal efficacy. This idea of efficacy is not an imaginary thing. Efficacy is based on being efficacious, meaning the more effective I am, the more effective I feel. What that means is, when add to that, these people are living amidst tremendous sense of loss, a tremendous sense of being out of control. So if you can give some modicum, some centimeter of control, that has enormous potential right now for creating a sense of efficacy. If you can, on the second session, tell a group of mothers when they report they did this or that, and you say, wow, that's incredible. What you did with your children is going to be so important. There is no more powerful message than you can give than that in creating efficacy in a sense of you are the instrument of change. You are the instrument of power. You are powerful. And to the extent that we use the expert model, where I'm the expert and you don't know anything, that takes away efficacy. Intervention can move quickly to increase targeted efficacies. What I mean here is, and Bandura talked about, there is no one efficacy. Well, there's some grand sense of I'm efficacious, but I can't, for example, work a sewing machine. So efficacy is specific. And which efficacy is needed? Well, if I have elderly people in my home, feeling efficacious of dealing with parents that have dementia, for example, that's a very specific efficacy that I can help with. Dealing with young children, spouses supporting each other, clinicians, teachers working with their groups, to the extent that you can work on specific efficacies that they need, that's what's critical. Clinical training tends to be very general, and you might specialize at the end. But the groups, the idea of working with paraprofessionals is to get them a skill that's specific to their niche. And that's what we're looking for here, targeted efficacies. Really important point, takeaway from this. Promoting active coping, as my good colleague Joop de Jong says in the Netherlands, gets survivors involved in their own recovery. Even something very abstract, and I don't know the exact situation on this, and I'm sure it's different in different cities and villages in Ukraine. But for example, the police might be so busy doing critical intervention with wounded that there's no one that can do the police work of working with juvenile delinquents, for example. So perhaps that's something that just older adults who maybe have, for example, some past teaching experience, they can work with those in the criminal justice system to work with the juvenile delinquents who now are kind of undirected because perhaps the probation officers are off fighting in the army. Now, I've never been a probation officer, but having been a teacher in the past, or maybe just a manager at a company, I might be able to be a good mentor for a group of 10 adolescents who have a troubled past. In any case, you're not only helping the youth here, think of the sense of efficacy you're giving to that person who is kind of just sitting in their apartment and feeling just worried and useless because they couldn't be out as a combatant and their job is not functional right now. You've given them a role. And you're doing that again by the thousands here. Self-government and participation is critical. So even in this, asking that group, let's go back to the idea of that shelter. What do you think that's needed? How would self-governance look here? Do we need a mayor of the place, a mayor and a council? Now, you never learned about that in your school of social work. But from that shelter, if they're living there, electing a mayor and a council could be the most important mental health intervention you do. And they might work on nothing to do with mental health. They might work on fair food distribution. They might work on making sure the weakest in that group and most isolated are not isolated. That's nothing to do with the training you ever did. It has everything to do with mental health here and creating self-efficacy and communal efficacy. The expert model actually often diminishes empowerment to the extent that you do the work. You might think that work is better. It probably is on an individual level. It is disempowering of that individual you're working with who would gain so much more by, okay, I know that you're wounded, but you're less wounded than those 30, and I want you working with them. Increasing empowerment can emphasize within different treatments, and you always want to think about this as, is the intervention I'm doing going to further empower the group? The more, the better, or am I disempowering by my excellent clinical work? Connectedness, promoting connectedness. Social support is a critical dimension of health. It is naive to think that social support and how to do it well is just known by others. In my own therapy work, I kind of laugh that when I get an engineer in couples therapy, I'm amazed at how much they don't know how to, I'm generalizing, how much they don't know how to be just an emotional person, to be connected to others, how to support their wife or husband. Do not assume that people know how to give everyday social support. There are rules of social support. You can find them online. And most people will not know how to do them. And even those that did might need to be re-energized because they have gained a sense of helplessness. And so even things they did know become, they think, well, how can I help? My wife is just so distressed. I have no idea. I'm not a psychiatrist. But yes, but here are things that you can do to offer social support. And then with groups, work with parents with their children, work with caregivers about working with the elderly. What about those that are disabled? Special needs exist for each of these groups. Again, social support is assumed to be organic. It is not necessarily organic. Some families do it better than others. And everyone slides to the bad part of the continuum when in crisis. So you have to help slide that group more towards the healthy dimension. Promoting hope and positive expectancy. There's an incredible scene in Steven Spielberg's movie that I'm blocking on the name right now. But in any case, it's during the Holocaust. And he brings a couple into a room in an apartment, and they're going to get the whole room. They owned the whole apartment before, 13 rooms, a wealthy family. And they're now, the husband says to the wife, see, it's not so bad. And then Spielberg, being the incredible director he has, moves 5 more families into the room. This is an incredible metaphor for Ukraine now, because the target of what you have to adjust to is constantly moving, and for the most part, not in a good direction. Perhaps there's some resiliency buildup with how well Ukrainian forces are doing. The world is incredibly impressed with how Ukrainian forces are performing. It has changed all military models of understanding of modern warfare. But in general, what was the thing to do yesterday has to be recalibrated today. So hope and positive expectancy has to exist in that space. At first, it had to be hope with just one family in the room. And then suddenly it has to be hope with 5 families living in the room. You have to naturalize the situation. Natural situation is going to be catastrophe, but there has to be hope within catastrophe, because even catastrophe is relative. Promote reasonable hope, because if you try to promote hope that's beyond reasonable, you'll lose people's attention. Honest messaging. Hope is lowest in those also that have least reason to be hopeful. The point is here, for some people, it is ridiculous to try to instill psychological hope unless you can get them material resources, food, safe shelter, access to some better medical care than they had. If I am diabetic and don't have my drugs, you are not going to produce hope in me unless you can get me insulin. That is not a reasonable psychological mission. So hope, again, and something that psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists never trained to do, to realize that you have to facilitate material resource delivery in order to increase hope. You have to move spirituality and meaningless to actions. So for example, if you had a church group, okay, believing in Christ can be restorative. But I love the adage that being Christ is the most restorative. Caring for the poor, caring for those weaker, operating a soup kitchen, bringing help to others. These are the things that are most important for spirituality during such time. And clearly, mental health professional role has to be increasing connections, perhaps the most important bottom line here, to others who normally do not deliver mental health services. Thinking outside the box. If what you did was being an individual clinician, that has little or nothing to do what is most important to do here. It at best is another valuable thing if all these things are done. And again, the reason for that is you have so much knowledge that you've never had to use before in terms of working with paraprofessionals, working with others, working with parents and teaching them how to support young children. And I'm going to end with that because I'm probably, there's a lot more slides here. And by the way, there's a whole group of slides at the end about social and political processes that occur that I shared that I think would be very helpful for you. And again, I want to reiterate, I am so happy. If I could, nothing would make me happier than if some of you reach out to me many of you reach out to me for further work with your group. So I'm going to end my part with that. I know we have other experts here in a panel, and I've been, considering I'm a professor, better with time than usual.
Thank you so much, Stevan, for an authoritative and excellent overview of the most important resiliency factors, and by delivering it such a comprehensive way with all these examples and references to the current situation in Ukraine, makes it very, very relevant for the audience. And I hope that they are responsive as you request. We have Oleh Chaban with us. We didn't introduce him initially, and thanks for staying with us throughout this, Oleh. We'll call on you in a minute, but before doing that, there may be some questions that we would like to entertain regarding the review that Stevan gave to us, and just calling Arik if you have any comments or reflections that you'd like to share with us or ask to Stevan, or could I call on you to make a few or one?
Just one. This is so fundamental and so dense that this particular presentation requires watching it time and again to integrate the amount of essential information that is here. And this is something to be studied as much as the X publication, but here is so obviously presented in a context of real world demand. I would just recommend seeing it time and again, taking notes, getting to learn, and eventually contacting Steve with more further clarification regarding all of the specifics. There is too much material here to be absorbed in just one listening.
Excellent, and thank you for.
And Irina, please make sure that you give everyone that's participated here my contact information, and please don't feel free to send it to other people in your network.
Irina, if I may ask, because I cannot read Ukrainian, but maybe you can call on one person in the audience who could raise their voice and just articulate one question before we go to Oleh. Would that be okay? Because we have over 100 participants, over 161, that one may be just expressing their thoughts or support or a question that you can entertain. Could you moderate that?
So I can see Professor Zohar with us, and I would be glad, of course, to hear his voice and his impression. But I can see as well here our dear colleagues from Vinnytsia, which is a city in the central part of Ukraine. And so last time we've heard Professor Tatiana Kamar, and maybe today we can hear Lilia Nemash, who is a psychotherapist from Vinnytsia symbol drama. And I know that Lilia is involved very much these days in work with displaced people within Ukraine.
So would you call on that person to raise their voice and speak in English or Ukrainian? Because then we can hear Ukrainian being translated to English.
Yes, Lilia, Nemash, please just give us a short feedback on your thoughts.
Please.
I know that this is stressful. I have heard, Eric, that people are stressed when we call them out, but on the other hand, how
We have
can
at least one person with their hand up.
Так, дуже так, вітаю всіх.
Welcome. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm impressed with the presentation. This is incredible. You know, it's a very logical and very cohesive presentation. You know, you didn't have that much time, but the work that I'm doing is logical. You know, it's all very well organized in folders, in a sequence of folders. So it's great material for self-organization for myself. I have a question. When we work with the wounded soldiers, many of them feel that it's important that they come back to the front line. But when we work with soldiers that are not coming back because their injuries are so severe that it makes it impossible for them to fight again. Every so often that's the case. So what's that determines the direction of our work? So we've heard the 5 essential principles today. So where do you draw that line? What are the key principles in one direction, and what should we focus on in the second option?
So I'm going to give an example. I'm going to give an example that underlines the strategy. Your best job might be, one possibility, finding the soldier who is doing well with that issue, or the 5 soldiers doing well with that, teach them some more principles and have them be working with other wounded soldiers, because they have credibility that you don't have. You're not a wounded soldier. You were not at the front. You didn't experience the horror that they've experienced the last month. But they cannot challenge that wounded soldier who's doing well with that issue. And again, doing well may very well include having some guilt. This is the idea of calibrating. It is relatively doing well. It is not perfectly doing well. And so this idea that you think you would be the one working with them, this brings the fact that now you have 5 and they may be able to choose 50, because there may be 2,000 wounded soldiers that can't go back. It may get to 3,000, 5,000, who knows? The same thing for those who are coming back with PTSD, who feel like they're cowards. They're not cowards. They have succumbed under heroism. Those who are doing relatively better can be the strength for others who are not. And then this affects the self-efficacy and communal efficacy of the whole group. We are lifting each other. Completely different than our everyday clinical model, which has nothing to do with we are lifting each other. The clinical model is I lift you. So
thank you. Thank you, Stevan. That is outside of the box, and that is the wisdom that you shared with us. Thank you for underlining that. Irina, I just want, in the interest of time, we have one person that raised
Дуже
their
дякую.
hand.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
you. Irina, with the one person that is holding a hand, would you want to call to that person to raise a question? Because I see that on my screen.
Yeah, Olga Davidova. Yeah, if you can please be.
Пане Стівен, в мене питання стосовно
I have a
четвертого.
question about principle 4, about the connectedness and social support. Many people have inquiries about the boundaries of responsibility for children, for elderly parents. What do you think? How do you explain it to a client where this responsibility ends for them? What is their responsibility? Because the feeling of guilt is directly linked to that feeling. What do you think? Thank you.
Well, again, I think there's an important principle here of teaching that I've found working with groups that is very powerful in this. And that is, what would you think if your best friend was doing all that you did? What would you say to them? Would you say you're not doing enough? And people will almost always say, no, I would tell them how incredible they're doing. And then I might challenge them. Oh, it's true for all your best friends, but not for you. You somehow can lift a weight that no one else can lift. Of course you feel some guilt, but you have to be as your best friend and telling yourself, wow, it's incredible how much you're lifting. And I, as expert, giving that message, telling them, I find it incredible what you've done. One of the most powerful things, this is a clinical example, was working with an inner city mother who herself had this horrible, the most horrible childhood you can imagine. And I just turned to her in therapy and said, wow, you know, you got your son to soccer, football, and your daughter in ballet lessons, and you got them a tutor. I am so impressed. Now, I wasn't talking about, she had severe PTSD and mental health issues, but I wasn't speaking to that. I was speaking to her empowerment. And you could just see her puff up. You could just see her strengthening. So, of course, people feel guilt. There's so much more to do. There is no way not to think that I'm not doing enough. But this example of what I would expect of my best friend, if I was speaking to my daughter and she came home and said she had done this with their child and that with their child, and this with her family, and she was still feeling inadequate, what would you tell your daughter that you love so much? And of course you would say, as a parent, as a grandparent, it's incredible what you've done. It's incredible. And of course you want to do more because you're their mother, but incredible what you've done.
Thanks again, Steven, for these principles, and again for the wisdom that you share with us. And thanks for the two questions. It's great that you're speaking your voice from Ukraine and that your voices are heard. I would like to give the floor now to Irina to introduce Oleg. He does not need any introduction because he is the one that's so well known to you, and he was with us, of course, on the steps in Odessa with our workshop. But before doing so, I want to thank Steven from Salt Lake City in the US, where it's very early in the morning. Thank you so much for being with us. And as Arik said, this needs to be repeated and rehearsed to understand and to appreciate the elegancy and the eloquent principles that you shared with us. So thanks again, Steven. And Irina, you have another.
As you told Eric, Professor Chaban is well-known Ukrainian scientist and psychiatrist and psychotherapist, and he is head of the Department of Medical Psychology, Psychosomatic Medicine and Psychotherapy at Bogomolets National Medical University. And Professor will present his very nice clinical case, and we would like to think all together, what does this mean to us today?
Вітаю, друзі, вітаю.
Welcome, friends. Welcome, Eric. Welcome, Marina. And I'm going to share my screen now. There are these things that affect you, and you never know the timing that'll happen. And I've worked with a big number of patients since the war, and I've started working way before the 24th of February. So I've heard hundreds of tragic stories of murders, rapes, of houses being burned, of people that were forced to move. So I'm giving lectures and I'm spreading the messages. And usually when I tell about a clinical case, I demonstrate these tragedies as figures, but in a very calm manner. And then this one tiny details that triggers you, and tears are bringing over your eyes, and you don't know how to speak. And you think, wait, it was a distraction. Maybe it's time for you to do some therapy, because after that, you just continue. The clinical trial that I bring to your attention is something I called a story about a sick old cat. What does it have to do with war? You see, as you work with deep human traumas, a different creature makes you flabbergasted, puts you on the spot. You don't know how to work with the patient, and you start working on your own state in order to develop a good tool for the patient to find a way out. So it all started with this letter. I get a Viber message. I need to read the message so that you understand what is happening. Hello, Oleg. She is my patient from a big city in the east of Ukraine. She writes in Russian. Hello, Oleg. Thank you for your responding, as always. I'm going to slow down. This time, I'm not speaking about myself. I don't even know where to start. I start to cry already. Okay, so my cat has cancer. It is 17 years old. I can't remember myself without her. She's special. She's the best cat in the world. I know the professionals would say that we make our pets human, but I still disagree. Not in this case. My cat is feeling worse. I understand everything. I cannot express how painful it is, and the fear and anxiety that I feel. I can't sleep well. I want just to be silent and to be on my own and nothing else. I feel so bad mentally that sometimes I can't move. I don't know how to survive this, how to cope with that. But I understand I have to, somehow. That's why I'm asking you for help. Because the most unbearable is yet to come. You're the first person to know about it. I don't have this energy to tell anyone. I'm not even sure if it's the right thing to do right now. In my country, there's so much horror. War disfigures and brings even more suffering. Whereas I'm talking about just a cat here. So this is how the story goes. A story about an old sick cat. I've known this patient for about 15 years. She's 26 years old, and her mom found me when she was slightly over 11 or 12 years old. This woman is not married. She lives in the city that is being shelled and bombarded as I speak. She has a wonderful family, but she has a very bossy, possessive dad and quite a soft and passive dad. He is now in the territorial defense units and he's rarely at home, and mom is constantly worried about the children and the husband, and she became obsessive in her worries and is trying to control and patronize, and she does it in a very in-your-face, straightforward manner. My patient is a very talented artist. She had her exhibitions in Ukraine and abroad. Her style is neo-romanticism. She often draws girls and animals. Since the beginning of war, she has a distinct, secluded life. She lost her sleep, and she talked about horrible pictures that keep popping up in her mind. She doesn't paint or doesn't even make sketches. Once she witnessed as a missile hit a multi-story building. She remembers a big blast and the smoke mixed with feathers or down, something unusual you see during the blasts. She was scared. She couldn't sleep. When she was in bomb shelters, she often imagined this weird smoke crawling in the shelter, and people were running in it. She started shaking and shivering. She never left her cat alone. She was together with the cat in the bomb shelter, and mom criticized her for that. So she asked me for help. And this was the case where I had a lump in my throat. Talking about transfer, this smoke, the cat. This talking seemed very naive, and I didn't even reply. And I deeply respect this woman, and I usually respond immediately, but this is where I stop. And I started doing self-analysis, not patient analysis, why I responded to the cat in such a manner.
Власне, те, що стало для мене можливістю далі з
And I
нею.
remembered a different thing. When it helped me to actually continue the conversation, to give her something. Some friends know that I'm writing short stories, and I have several books called mini stories, and one of them is named The Dog, and it's based on a real story of another patient who's a well-known poet who became an alcoholic and a homeless person. But he had a good friend, a dog. But, well, his wife told him to stay away from the house, and he was living somewhere in the basement with the dog. And then the dog disappeared suddenly. So this person got other homeless people to go around all the dog shelters to find the dog. I mean, it's a story, but it is needed to explain how I worked with that original patient. So he didn't find the dog in the shelter, but he saw another dog who was just looking at him and was not whining. If you've seen dogs in shelters, you might understand that dogs, when they see a possible new owner, they are wagging their tails, they are barking or whining, but he liked the dog which didn't draw any attention to itself, and he took it. So then he tried to take this dog home. His wife said, no, I would not take you and the dog. And, well, he just decided to live elsewhere in the city. And then slowly, he found a job as a yard keeper, and he was writing poems for his dog. But then the dog died in a few years, and the last poem this person read out at the grave of that dog. And then the person got back to his wife saying, my friend died. And the wife took the person back. So this long story was that to explain that I decided to switch sides in this story with the patient. I gave her that story and I asked her, can you please tell me what I was feeling when I was writing that short story? And, well, she is an artist and she also has very good analytical skills. She said, well, if this dog, well, then the life of that person, the poet, the alcoholic, then he would not come back home. But he managed to come back home when the life of that dog was over. And then I said, okay, now let's get back to your cat. You know that the cat dies soon. You can't do anything about it. So what can happen that you start a new life? And well, she had the depression and PTSD, and then when she realized that, she started talking. And yeah, now this is it from me.
Thank you, Professor. Can you please stop sharing the slide?
One second. Yeah, that's okay. Stop sharing. Oh, yeah, then we're back. Well, this has to sink in, I think, and all the attendees are listening into this story. Let's have a few reflections on this. If I may invite Irina, you can do that best. I'm tempted to ask Stevan Hobfoll to reflect first, but I'm not knowing if that would be wise to do now. But if you wanted to comment, Stevan, and any thoughts that you hear that you want to share when listening into this story?
My main thought is this is obviously a psychiatrist with incredible expertise, and my message would be the thing of most value is him to take principles from this that he could translate for. This is someone with such expertise that if he could be doing a webinar that people could listen into from all over Ukraine and taking this example and broadening it for that large group, that he could be delivering this excellence to 1,000 people, because you can't have this kind of excellence isolated to the individual patients that he might see. It's just an underuse of this, one of really treasured resources of Ukraine. And that's, the principle and the idea that we have to move into this very different space of national crisis. There are 500,000 individuals in Ukraine with a similar problem to this individual patient. And unfortunately, we can't clone him so he sees all of them. But we can clone through media and through transfer of principles from it.
Amplify is disseminate and amplify. Yes, thank you. Again, Arik, any thoughts from your end?
Just one very simplistic. I don't know what Steve would think about it. There's always this symbolic object or symbolic occurrence. And in many of my post-traumatic patients, although the trauma was multifaceted, many things were happening, buildings were collapsing, there was very often one object or one memory, one specific item that symbolized for them or crystallized the entire traumatic experience. And that condensation into a single object, it could be a cat, it could be a cry that they heard, and those are eventually the ones that repeat themselves as traumatic intrusive recollections. So why is it so that some aspect, even a minute aspect, becomes to represent the entire scene is still a mystery for me. But I think that if this is to be added or somehow appended to the principles that Steve presented,
Yeah.
the value of
Exactly, because you found something that you have an insight for that others without your experience wouldn't have, and the ability to crystallize it as to something that is common, and getting others to work on that thing. And it almost always symbolizes some exceptionally meaningful loss or traumatic moment. And it might not be a thing. Sometimes it's, you could not get it didn't matter everything else you lost in the home. Your priceless family pictures have been lost. And everything can be encapsulated around that. And it's a very, so this idea of finding a common theme that you can then translate across the tens of thousands.
Let's ask Oleg first, and then I see Tatiana. But first, Oleg, reflection. Please, Oleg, if you can spare some words.
Те, що ми зводимо дуже хороші ідеї, що ми
These are very good ideas. Indeed, very often we have some wide tragedy, the diffused fear and anxiety, and we focus it in one object. Very often we might use it in therapy, but here in that case, well, I didn't have even to find the meaning of the symbol of her life. It was quite evident, and well, she is there, she is not married, she is drawing, so this, and the cat or a dog, it can take any owner, is accepting any owner. They are so detailed, so the loss of these items, it's difficult to work with them because we have to counterpose something more significant, and something more significant was not my story, of course. It was about the situation of safety, as we've had today. And I said, I am with you. I had a similar experience. And the story was the bridge that created that. And also I draw the perspective. I said that I will be with you. So you remember that the cat might die, but I will be with you after that. So it's also showing that safety will be there in the future with her. So, and I'm now trying to bring in this idea of the roadmap of psychotherapy, so that the person, for example, don't now, because now the person might not have time, but later when the person will start drinking, they would know who to turn to because they have this roadmap of psychotherapy. But thank you so much for all the comments. They are very, very deep. And even the presentation started with the notion that that safety is a subjective, it's a relative thing. So we have to think who can provide evidence for my personal sense of safety. It might be knowledge, for example. Knowledge can give enough evidence, or professionalism. Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you, Oleg. Let's go. We are almost at the end of this session, but before doing so, not rush too quickly. Tatiana had a hand raised, so let's hear from Tatiana. Is that okay, Irina? I'll
be brief. Thank you so much, Oleg, for this example. I practice psychodrama. So when I read this case, I thought that, well, switching roles might be good, but switching roles with what? With the cat. But it was the phenomenal thing that you gave this example with the story, which shows that, well, there is a way out. So thank you for this example. For the psychodrama specialist, it was very useful. Thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you, Chachana. I think you echo for a lot of people in the audience. We all were listening to this in the same spirit as you just reflected. Irina, you raised your hand as well.
Yeah, I see that time is running out, but we have one question that probably we might address during our next hot topic or hot topics. But I would like to sound this out because this is actually the reality of psychologists within Ukraine. So Yulia Bogush asks, I don't have experience of being a psychologist, but because of specific knowledge, sometimes I work as a military psychologist at the unit of Ukrainian armed forces. So could you please tell me some methods, working methods, which I can advise to soldiers that are coming from horrible, I don't know, shiftings. And please count that those males very specifically react to my advices. And usually they said, I don't need your advices, or this is a bullshit. Thank you. So on one hand, people who are not called to be psychologists are working as psychologists and even as a military psychologist, and they feel helpless because something that they want to be effective, but they can't.
So there's excellent workbooks on mental health first aid that are meant for paraprofessionals or professionals to bring to this more group level. And again, it's the very thing that a social worker, because there are hundreds of people like this individual who are working in roles that they're completely not trained for, who becomes the supervisor, for example, of this group, setting up this pyramid. So it's a perfect example. And we do have the templates, and those templates, by the way, are based on conservation of resources theory that I proposed years ago, and married into the 5 principles.
These can be found and will be shared after this session. And thanks for your details, your contact details, that people can connect with you after the session, Stevan. We need to respect time. It is 10:15 after 10 o'clock in Ukraine, so it's getting late. I feel that this is a sense of cohesiveness that we have with so many participants. We have 165 that are still attending this call. We're doing this every 2 weeks, and being here, sharing your thoughts, being present, even though you're not expressing your voices, you are here with us and we are here with you. So we share our best and we bring this meaning and a sense of cohesiveness to the table. We'll keep doing that. So thanks for being with us. And Joseph Zohar is with us. We haven't heard your voice yet. Do you want to say something to address the audience before we close, Yossi?
Yeah, again, thanks, Stevan, for excellent talk, and Eric for your comment. I think the real challenge for us, and we wrote it in this letter to Lancet, is how we can combine the modern social digital technique with this excellent principle. And I think this is the challenge ahead of us. And I think we are on the way to develop it, but I think we should keep doing it. And thank you, Irena, for organizing it again.
Absolutely.
And in closing, I want to reiterate, I hope I won't butcher this, Dayakuya za vash heroism. Thank you for your heroism. Slava Ukraini. Ukraine is giving an example to the world that will be taught in books for the next 100, if not hundreds of years. The valiance and resilience that Ukraine is showing is a phenomenon that the world is in awe of. We are in awe of you.
Thank you,
That
Stevan.
touches everybody by hearing that. I see many responses and hearts and expressions of gratitude. Thank you for saying that.
I'm crying a little bit, so it's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Really appreciate that. Irina, you wanted to end the session and then we're closing. Thank you again, Stevan.
Yeah, thank you very much. We see a lot of comments that this is very touching meeting today, and thank you everybody for being with us. See you in 2 weeks.